Thanks for joining. We have an amazing session today. And this is a question I think that is on top of all of our minds, all of us that have tried meditation, that have meditation practice, that intend to live a mindful life. And there's this thing that there's something so challenging about it. And that is the topic, those of you obviously who saw it in the email, and that is the topic of how to stay present. Why is it such a challenge? Why is it such a struggle? And in a nutshell, I'm just going to spill the beans right off the top, but then we'll go into detail and analyze it a little bit and look at some history. The secret to staying present is to be at peace with not being present. Let that sink in for a moment. So the secret to staying present is to be okay with not being present. And so what this refers to, it's actually an ancient principle straight from Zen Buddhism. I had a neuroscientist on my podcast last week, and he called this the law of opposites. Alan Watts brought it more into Western consciousness, and he called it the reverse law or the backwards law. I actually have some quotes from Alan Watts. I'm going to read it really quick to you. When you try to stay on the surface of the water, you sink. But when you try to sink, you float. Similarly, when you try to sleep, your efforts will keep you awake. You'll only fall asleep if you stop trying. And the Tao Te Ching and all ancient Buddhism analogies of the master and the student, in many different shapes or forms, they all refer to this. Here's another one. The more you try and grab hold of something, the more it slips through your fingers. When you realize nothing is lacking, the whole world belongs to you. So all this ancient wisdom is full of this illusion. It's alluding to the fact that when we try too hard, or the harder we try, the less it works. And it's something just very particular and curious about the way the universe works. You could expand this into law of attraction, where there's always this statement of the more you give your attention to what you don't want, the less you're giving it to what you actually want. There's this popular notion of what you resist persists. So it's out there in my private mentoring and in just conversations and talks at events and retreats. It comes up all the time that, especially we in the West, we have this idea of forcing something. We've been conditioned to think of what is ultimately an aggressive approach when you really look at it closely, that we always want to force something, when we want to fight something, we want to make it happen, we need to work for it. We've been instilled with this finger to the bones and make it happen attitude, and lots of motivational speakers out there who make it happen, rah rah. So what does that mean for our practice ultimately? Well, as mentioned right at the start, is when we're trying to be present, we're taking us out of presence. We're focusing on the wrong end of things. We're focusing on that which we really want, but by focusing on it, we're coming from a place of lack. And then we're just reinforcing more lack. And then we never get there. There's a second component to this, and that is, we've maybe heard this in the shape of spiritual bypass, where you're just using your practice to not actually look at yourself. And so there's a component of that in that as well. And going back to, well, if we can't achieve something by focusing on it, what do we do then, right? How do we get there? And this is the trick of all mindfulness and all meditation, is to see things as they are. It's to allow things to be as they are. And in the case of peace and presence and mindfulness and stillness, it's seeing things as they are. If we notice that we have a busy mind, it's the noticing that the mind is busy, not the resisting, but the noticing, the unbiased observation of the mind being whatever it may be. That's what calms the mind and actually brings us into presence. So presence is not the state that we're looking to achieve by making it happen somehow, that we have to develop some kind of skills for, but rather it's right in front of us, all around us, all the time, every moment we engage with anything, any place, person, or thing, seeing it as it is without wanting it to be different. That pulls us into presence. And there's this incredible peace in there, and this non-friction. It's an acceptance. It's a surrender. We've heard that term many, many times. What does it really mean? Surrender is seeing things as they are without wanting them to be different. And that's ultimately the path of least resistance. It's a very practical thing. We can take action. We're putting ourselves in a position to take action, clear action, Buddhists call it right action, because our mind is equanimous. It's balanced. It's seeing all the perspectives available. It's not focused on one point of resistance. It's not pulling in the past of, oh, this should be different. It's not pulling in expectations of this, I want it this way, why isn't it? And this whole resistance and this energy of judgment starts to build up. And we get lost very quickly. And there is no presence in reactivity. I have a whole workshop on reactivity. Maybe I'll do that one of these times. So presence is working with what's in front of us and learning to not judge it. And there's always something in front of us. And the way we engage with what's in front of us and around us is through our senses, our sense perceptions. We're constantly engaging with the world around us. Our senses are seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, feeling everything around us all the time. And the more we can stay in the sensation. We had a wonderful event here last night, did a sensory meditation, and it was listening to the chirps of the jungle, the sound of the nearby fountain. It's listening to people cough. It's hearing the clanking of the silverware that was being prepared for the dinner table. Everything is an opportunity to sink into presence. And we're so used to judging some things as, oh, that's pleasant, and other things that's unpleasant. And that takes us out of presence again. We're labeling, we're defining, we're judging, activating the mind. We're coming out of the sense perceptions and into the judging of things. And in that judging, there's either clinging or resisting. We cling to the pleasant sensations that we label as pleasant, and we push away the unpleasant sensations that we label as unpleasant. And boom, we just removed ourselves out of the flow of actually continuing to experience our sensations, and we're back in our head, judging our thoughts, judging our feelings, any sensations that arise. And so that is the core of the struggle, is that we can't just see things for what they are. And so our meditation practice, our presence practice, is all about developing an awareness muscle so that we're not identified with each thought that comes along, so that we can stay with the sensations of what each thought brings. We have a choice whether to engage with certain ones that we feel are beneficial, that our inner blueprint is resonating with, or we let the ones that are unpleasant, that are negative, have a negative charge go. And that's the choice and the perspective and the awareness that we can then ultimately engage with the world around us in a more conscious way. And the same thing applies to sensations, body, feelings that arise, is that we have this propensity to, again, push down unpleasant ones, cling to the pleasant ones. That takes us out of the flow, takes us into our head, takes us into the realm of clinging and resisting. And that leads to judging, it leads to controlling and steering, wanting things to be different because we have all these expectations that we start to pull in. Everything gets very complicated quickly. Even just describing it as I'm doing right now, I'm like, doesn't even feel good to describe all the messiness that happens when we overthink, when we start to judge. And so many other aspects come into the picture, such as the sense of separateness that ensues when we're caught in the judging mind. Every time we judge something, we label something, we define something. Judging isn't just negative, it's giving something a label, a definition. It's no longer just experiencing, no longer being in the presence of the tree, but rather calling it a tree, defining it, giving it some biostatus. And every single time we label something, we are now saying, I'm over here, and that which I label, judge, define is over there. And so when we're exclusively living through the mind's job is to label and define and explain things. And then we get caught in this mode that constantly creates a sense of separateness throughout the day. Separateness, judging, separateness, judging, separateness. And then some of the more negative aspects start to come into the picture of anxiety and fear. We feel small because we're separate from everything. We feel separate from nature. We even talk about it that way, that we go out into nature, as opposed to realizing we are an expression of nature just like everything else. Everything is matter. Everything is alive. And so we already talk like we're separate. And then we can only have ill will. We can only hate when we feel separate, from afar. By the way, anyone that has any questions, you can always use the virtual hand at the bottom of the screen or drop something into the chat. Yeah, the mind keeps spinning around. So what I just described is not an on-off switch. Can't just switch into presence. It's an awareness muscle that we need to develop, just like going to the gym. And we start with small weights. We have when we start meditating, we don't just sit for 10 hours a day off the bat, but we start with 5 minutes, 2 minutes, one conscious breath. That's already a shift. It brings a change into the dynamic, a change into the relationship with life, with our own aliveness, the life force that is flowing through us. Suddenly there's a gap between thoughts that come along and our awareness of them. If we can be aware of our thoughts, then clearly we're not our thoughts, because we're so identified. We grow up so conditioned to just believe every thought that we think we're our thoughts. We're not our feelings. We grow up so reactive to our feelings, clinging and resisting. And then we get into this mindset where we're so identified with our feelings that we think we're our feelings. And some of them become so overwhelming and hard to approach because we're so fearful of them. A lot of trauma that happens. Feels like it could kill us. And no doubt some feelings can be extremely difficult to feel, to experience, to be present with. But ultimately, it's just an energy. It's a form of energy that carries a charge, and it won't kill you. No feeling can kill us, even though it feels like that sometimes. When things don't happen the way we want, life feels so burdensome, leading to frustration, sad, and unworthiness. Yeah. So there's so many emotions packed into our resistance to the present moment not being the way we want it to be. And again, the complication of that, sadness, guilt, past experiences, attitudes that we've inherited from our family and our generation and our lineage, and um, so many things going on that everything gets pulled into this combustible kind of relationship that we have with the present moment. And again, we can't get to peace and we can't get to presence by wanting it more. It's where we started from, and we spend so much force on trying to get there. And then when we do experience, bliss in maybe a sit, then we want to get back there again. Then an expectation has formed, and then we try even harder. I did this for a while. It blocked me for almost a year. So I was trying to get to back to the place where I had a blissful sit. Why can't I make that happen again? It happens so subtly, so quickly. And then we're kind of stuck. And somehow we have to unravel all of that. It does take some patience and practice to unravel it, but it's possible. Everyone has the opportunity for presence around them all the time. And again, it goes back to seeing things as they are without wanting them to be different. That pulls us into presence. You could say that presence is a byproduct of non-resistance. It's the natural organic occurrence of seeing things as they are. Presence by itself is not this thing that we need to try to make happen. And we're so wired to try and make things happen. So this law of opposites, I think, gives a great clue into how the universe works. It's kind of funny that it always responds. Initially, we think it responds in the opposite way when we want something, not realizing that wanting is typically from a place of lack because we don't have it. So we want something, but we're ultimately giving our attention to something we don't have, a lack, and then creating more lack. That which we give our attention to persists. We fuel it. And we can get caught in these negative loops. In the recent days, I had a hard time to stay present. So far, what I have been doing is keep telling myself, this is just a thought. A moment, I can change it. A moment, and I can change it. Just like fear, it's only a thought. So come back to now, breathe, release, breath, release. Yeah, beautiful. Our breath is really a wonderful tool in all of this because it's so simple. Everyone has it. It's universal. And simply by focusing on the breath, there's not a lot about breath that conjures up, it's a simple relationship that we have with breath. And so just simply observing our breath as it is just a wonderful thing. There are certain techniques that recommend, counting or mantras or visualizations, along with the breath, in combination with the breath, many different techniques. The one I promote that I practice for myself is really truly seeing your breath as it is. You can sometimes give it a little bit of a jump by breathing harder, slightly harder. And this is the meditation we'll do today, to get to the touch of the breath so that you have a point of awareness, but then returning to natural breath and normal breath. So there is this wonderful tool of breath that we can use to train ourselves to really see things as they are. But it's not so much about keeping our attention on the breath. It's about noticing when the mind comes in to pull our attention away, because that is the culprit here. We're so conditioned to live through the mental lens of defining, labeling, We have such an active mind, all of us. It's used to controlling us and steering us and dominating us. It controls us for the most part, growing up, especially in the Western world. The mind is a wonderful tool, but we're not using it as a tool so much. It's using us to just run havoc. And there's some great literature out there on why that may be. Again, this Chris Niebauer was neuroscientist on my podcast, talked about how the brain evolved under circumstances of survival. So it was always solving a problem. And that simply today, we don't have this constant survival situation at hand. So thus the brain still needs problems to solve. So it just creates problems. and they come out in this weird way. They're like fake problems. So it all comes back to coming out of the mind, because it's always in many ways it's misplaced, and it struggles with this modern life, struggles with having a purpose. And so a lot of these distractions that we have are an extension of that. But it's all about coming out of the mind ultimately into the wisdom of the body, where our sensations lie. The bigger piece of presence is to not just observe our thoughts and allow all thoughts to come and go. I hear this all the time, that there's this misconception out there about meditation, mindfulness, that you're somehow suppressing thoughts or wanting them to go away. And then nothing could be further from the truth. It's all about seeing things as they are. So thoughts come along and giving them the space to be. And when you give things the space to be, when you're holding space for them, then you become the container, the witnessing awareness, the unbiased observer to the thoughts. You become bigger than the thoughts. And thoughts enter your experience, and then they exit your experience. And then you're actually alive and connected to the present moment, simply by allowing what's showing up to be there. So I hope this is helpful, because a lot of meditation is also not really taught in this particular fashion. It doesn't go into the detail of this reverse law. And then we find ourselves trying to force ourselves to sit, trying to force our minds to be quiet, trying to just somehow think of a way to be present. So that's our meditation practice today. We'll be fully focused on really creating and nurturing our awareness muscle around thoughts arising and passing, becoming the container for life entering our experience and exiting our experience. And I love this exercise so much because we can do it any time of the day. It's a one-to-one relationship. So the more time we put in, the more our awareness muscle builds. And it doesn't require any type of special circumstance or situation, no equipment or anything. I think I've mentioned before in these sessions how the first couple of years of my meditation practice, I would just sit on my couch. You don't even have to sit on a yoga mat in lotus pose or have a special room. It helps after a while. You want that because a certain energy builds and you want to have your quiet corner. But you can do it in front, right before an important meeting, just to ground yourself, come back to the present moment. And again, presence is a natural, organic byproduct to seeing things as they are. And in this exercise that we're going to do right now, the mind is going to jump in pretty quickly as we try to keep our attention on our breath. Within a few seconds, you'll notice that the mind comes in and pulls your attention away. And sometimes we get lost in thought for 5, 10, even longer minutes. And then there's this moment where we come out of being lost in thought, where we notice, oh my gosh, I was lost in thought. And that is the key moment to accept that your mind has wandered, that your attention is not where you want it to be. It's not on your breath. It's your attention was lost in thought land. And with as little resistance as possible, with as little friction, with as little frustration as possible. That noticing is the moment where we train our awareness muscle, our acceptance muscle, to seeing things as they are. So, oh, my mind has wandered. And then path of least resistance, bring our attention back to where we want it, which is at the entrance of our nostrils, feeling the incoming and outgoing breath. And this little exercise represents it's a microcosm of the larger, the macro of what we do all day long. When we experience a situation that is different from what we want it to be, different from our expectations and our planning and all our predictions, everything that the mind had already created ahead of an event. When we notice that it's not the way we expected it to be, how do we respond to it as opposed to reacting to the picture in our head? That's the difference between reaction and responding. We react to what we had expected, which is in our head. Responding is to what's present happening right now. So when we notice in this exercise that our mind has wandered, that is that moment where we train ourselves to come out of the reaction to where we want our attention to be, and to accept, surrender, see it for what it is. Oh, my mind has wandered. And smoothly, evenly bring your attention back without frustration. You'll be frustrated at first because it's not working. Why can't I just keep my attention on my breath? But again, it's that old wiring speaking. And you just do this over and over and over. And then slowly we come out of the reacting to noticing that our mind is not where we want it to be. And more quickly also come out of being lost in thought. And even just 1%, 2%, 5% improvement of this is bringing back aliveness. When we're lost in thought, we're not really alive. We're not here. We're lost in thought. And you can even feel that when you snap out of it, you feel like you're merging from this fog, from this dense molasses of like, where was I? You went down the rabbit hole. And one thought leads to the next and the next and the next. That's why it's called the monkey mind. So again, noticing that our mind has drifted, that is the opportunity to rewire ourselves. Literally, if you want to look into the science, there's, the Joe Dispenzas of the world that have done a ton of research on this to see how the brain changes. Dr. Amen as well. Some great stuff out there. And bring our attention back to our breath. So the focus should not be on how long can I keep my attention on my breath, because we're kind of, again, conditioned to think that way. That's not where we make progress. It's the amount of non-resistance when we notice that our mind is not where we want it to be, when we notice that the present moment is different from what we want it to be, that we then bring our attention back to our breath as smoothly and frictionless as possible. And then that little template right there applies to every situation, basically, every situation of every day that we encounter, because life is always changing. It's always evolving. It's never the way we expected. This mental lens, the mind loves to label and identify and know things. It's a tool designed to know things. And if we're so head heavy and designed and conditioned to live through that mental lens, then we can't help ourselves but try and predict the future. That's what the mind is essentially doing all the time. It's always looking for the next unknown moment, trying to fill it with something known, project something it thinks it knows into it. And even though it never turns out that way, because the detail of life is just, it can't be predicted and cannot be anticipated. But we know no better way. We haven't really gone deep enough. There are no institutions in life that teach us mindfulness and presence. Only later we kind of realize the way we've been living hasn't been working. There must be a better way to apply ourselves to this precious life, and then we kind of find to it. But we've for decades been already conditioned to just react to things. So with that said, I know that was a lot to take in because it requires really, there are some programs that talk about how to reverse engineer your day to basically think in opposites. If you Google it, you'll see practitioners who promote this. I think the intentional creation of thinking, in opposite ways in reverse order, that too has a sense of forcing to it. And so it might just defeat the very purpose is trying to achieve again. So it's tricky. It's tricky that the things we want and focus on, um, that's not how you achieve them by focusing on them, but rather by kind of focusing away from them, finding the inverse to work on, and then we get there naturally. So it's a beautiful insight too, because it shows us how life is meant to be easy. It's meant to be light and organic and natural. Things are meant to just fall into place. We may have noticed already, whenever we try something really, really hard, sometimes even when we do achieve it, it's like it wasn't worth it. It was just too much, too hard. And putting brick on brick, there must be better ways to manifest our purpose and a great life than having to work for it so hard. And this inverse law sheds light. It points into the direction of ease, of the organic unfolding of things. All right. Yes, reminders. It's all about reminders. Um, there's growing into the fullness of life. There's so many moving parts, to become one with everything ultimately, right? That too is a law of inverse, of like a backwards logic in a way, that by letting go of our beliefs, we become everything. It's not by knowing more, it's not by believing more and more and more and more and more and more that we become whole. It's by releasing what we believe in that we then become one with everything. All right. So with that said, I think we have a great session. We'll do this for 20 minutes, and I'll guide us through the first 5 minutes or so. And then from there, you're on your own. But doing this in a group, it really amplifies this presence muscle, this awareness, this surrender, this allowing things to be as they are. The spark of presence is there. We share it amongst ourselves, even across distances. And it tends to make the whole practice a lot easier. So that's what we're here for. All right. So with that said, let's find a comfortable position. And with our eyes and mouth closed, focus on the incoming and outgoing breath at the entrance of your nostrils. If you have trouble locating your breath, you may breathe slightly harder once or twice until you feel the touch of your breath. And then return to natural breath, normal breath. Seeing your breath as it is, without wanting it to be different. Let the detail of your breath pull you in closer. If it's shallow breath, let it be shallow. If it's a deep breath, let it be deep. If it's more in the left nostril, let it be the left nostril. If your breath is more in the right nostril, let it be the right nostril. Or if it's both nostrils, let it be both. Notice the temperature of the incoming breath. Notice the temperature of the outgoing breath. Notice if there's a difference. Notice the pace of the incoming breath. Notice the pace of the outgoing breath. Notice if there's a difference. And whenever you find that your mind has wandered, simply notice it. And with as little frustration as possible, bring your attention back to the incoming and outgoing breath at the entrance of your nostrils. Natural breath, normal breath. Seeing your breath as it is, without wanting it to be different. accepting the reality of this moment, not wanting it to be different. Let the detail of your breath pull you into presence. Whenever you feel ready, gradually open your eyes. Notice your environment. Notice yourself in your environment. Notice subtle flow of sensations in your body. Notice your aliveness.